what the hell does agonistics mean? Because obviously your sense of justice is determined by your sort of your empirical experience. Like, you know, um, a man's sort of experience of injustice is going to be entirely different to a woman's. The same
Absolutely.
along um, race and gender, race and sexuality, and um, this. So this sense of the totality of society. Anyone that attempts to draw up a manifesto is sort of claiming in the first instance that they've got a decent grasp of this society. But of course, that led to the grand narratives up to 100 years ago. And since then, the terrain of undecidability has expanded, and we've questioned everything, and we're so far from God now, and God, sure, we don't even have faith in our own rationality anymore. Who the fuck knows what's happening? And the theory of the impossibility of that social totality is a sort of an underpinning keystone of of postmodern sort of thought. And basically there's always a gap between how we articulate the world, or how we sense and communicate how we communicate how we sense the world, and that actual world. This is Lacan's real that resists the symbolic. So we can attempt to symbolize, communicate this world, this empirical real that we experience, but it will never be a full enough articulation, a full enough representation of what's really there. And because we come away from that moment to a moment between us and say, oh my God, I just saw or felt or blah, blah, blah. But already what I'm saying isn't grasping the essence of that real.
Sure.
So,
I think, is it then just because, I struggled actually with the Lacan and the real for quite a while, actually, even going through, our earlier readings of capitalist realism. And it did give me, but eventually I think when I'd finally kind of had the mirror phase of the idea kind of hammered into me by enough different resources. So I guess, just to sort of have it out in my head, just in case there's something I've missed from it, this idea that, we will struggle inevitably to be able to, I guess, articulate whether it's a moment or a sense of being authentically, or there will be a worry also that we will be constantly inauthentically or unable to articulate it, to say, from me to you, my sense of being or my experience of something, my understanding of something, because how you also perceive me is different to how I will perceive myself. And if I can't articulate myself, my sense of being, or my experiences to you authentically, because there's this blockage, I suppose, that is always how you're experiencing, I guess, the fear or worry, is it, that the idea that there will always be this blockage of how you're experiencing me or taking in my experiences, so to speak, will always have an air of,
I don't even know, is it a blockage? Because it's like, I don't know what interaction or interface this is, but like there's something like on a phone or whatever that if you touch it, it disperses, like in a sort of a Schrodinger's cat sort of sense. But like already what you're describing there, just between two people, dialogue between two people, the sort of field of subjectivities multiplies.
Yeah, no, that's probably a much easier way to describe it, I guess.
But rather than a blockage. I mean, so there's a barrier there, a blockage.
Sorry, I think I would have meant barrier rather than, I guess, blockage.
But even still, it's what the barrier is just our ability to grasp in total sense, like to become objective to our dialogue, to see that field of like dispersing meaning and subjectivities, like the different sort of, I mean, you just put it there, but you wouldn't understand what I was saying, sort of thing, even though you're speaking the same language. But even at that, even between those 2 points, attempting to like a dyadic dialogue, um, the internal identities of each of those individuals might interpret at any given moment that dialogue in an entirely different way. So it just
Exactly.
bifurcates in a sort of like a near infinite situation. And
Okay.
but this gap between the real and our articulation of it, I guess, is where the sort of the radical negativity lies. And I just threw that in there, like as if I had said it already. The radical negativity is so the reason I brought this up was because in the previous point we were talking about these antagonisms, and sure, why are there these antagonisms? So hegemony and socialist strategy was written as a sort of before neoliberalism had really taken off, like I said, before the social liberal element, the third way, the left leaving the left, Blair and Clinton, before all of that, but totally relevant to that. They wrote that book as a critique of the traditional left, not the new left that would come to be. And that was because the traditional left, due to Marx's hegemonic position within that, or Marx's doctrine, rather than the man himself, that sought to describe and achieve a social totality as if it could possibly do so. And this is the difference between modern concept of society and postmodern concept. So 100 years ago, or roughly speaking, the concepts, or the trend in thinking started to sort of appreciate the context rather than the content of something, I think, is a decent way of putting it. And this idea of the impossibility of the universal, of conceiving of society, of touching the real, came to be. And in hegemony and social strategy, the critique is that, okay, you can attempt to reconcile your articulation or your conception with the real, but because it'll always be an artificial bridging of the gap between those two things, there'll always be a violence and there will always be suppression. And what both the traditional left and the new left came to do, well, the new left was the one that came to do it. I mean, I suppose there's arguments that the traditional left did it as well in some communist instances, though I'd probably argue against that if I could, but not here. Is that stretch is where authoritarianism is instituted, is because you're demanding that your vision of the real is a universal situation and it must be accepted, and in so doing you immediately exclude anyone who disagrees with you. And and what capitalist realism is the attempt to combat those that would disagree with that suturing of reality that's sewing together neatly of the ideology and the reality. And any technique or method to suppress the possibility of dissent, um, the whatever power is at hand to do so, and that act is obviously totalitarianism. It's an attempt to totalize society, and but because that gap exists, there's a radical negativity. You will never institute here. Back to the boy with his manifesto. He will never, no matter how close he gets to Hitler or Mussolini, he'll never actually bridge that gap, and will have to become a Hitler or Mussolini to if even for a moment stabilize that vision in society, the amount of suppression that's needed. And yeah, radical negativity. Every time the horizon is brought, is sort of is neared, then antagonisms will just flare up. It makes sense. Like, if I start telling you how something is, you'll immediately go, "Nah, go fuck yourself."
Yeah.
So that's basically radical negativities right there. I should have said that from the start. I read that. Always antagonism, and so this is where the sort of the idea of contingency comes from. That any given moment that does suture the totality is as a contingent articulation, literally because one a sort of a unitarily sourced vision implemented at a near universal scale, because that will always derive, or because antagonisms will always derive from such a feat. It's always there. That order is always contingent. Just in the mere act, or in the mere existence of contestation. So it's one person's word against another, and if that one person somehow utilizes power